Welcome everybody to another episode of the Haunted Vermont podcast. My name is Paul Doski, and joining us is a author that is pretty, I would say, well known for the time being of writing around 4 or 5 books. I want to say he can correct me and all that stuff, but because it's not about me, it's about who the special guest is, and it's none other than author J.W. Ocker.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Now, do you prefer to be called Mr. Ocker or...
No, you can call me Jason.
Jason, okay.
Yeah, I made the mistake of... I used initials for my first book just because I thought that's what authors did. Because all the authors I read had initials. And I wish I hadn't because it's so confusing.
It kind of is because that's all you want to say now. It's like, hey, Mr. J, you know?
J,
like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or Mr. Ocker.
I was doing like a pilot show for the Travel Channel at one point, and the crew kept calling me J-Dub. And it was like, that was my lowest point of wishing I had never initialized my name. Makes signatures easier.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's true. So we're here basically to kind of help talk about what I know of is your latest book that came out last year, and depending on release date that you want to go by, but I want to say the paper, or maybe rephrase this, the hardcover edition was like October, and then I think I've read somewhere like your audio book was like September or something like that.
Yep, exactly right. United States of Cryptids came out October. I think it was pushed back to one point to October. It also confuses things because that was also the publishing world was still in the throes of like paper shortages from COVID and stuff like that. So yeah, it was like a multivariate release date.
Well, I mean, COVID had done a lot of damage when people don't really realize it, or maybe they do, but then they don't realize it because they always got to find something to complain about. So,
yeah, in fact, when the book came out, it actually, the initial run sold out really fast, like surprisingly fast, I guess, to me and my publishers. So they had to re-up, but it took another 6 months to get it restocked on Amazon because they had to like get them reprinted again, shipped across the world. It was like it was a big complex initiative because again everything was shortage and all the supply chains were like a mess. So it was good news, bad news. Good news, sold out. Bad news, it's going to take a long time to get more copies out. But now they're all stocked everywhere. You can get it wherever you need to. So
yeah. I mean, well, it's not as bad as it was when it first started. We can all, I think, agree to that.
Oh, totally.
But yeah, your publisher is Quirk Books.
Yeah, Quirk Books. They are out of Philadelphia. They're an amazing company. They're relatively small in the world of publishing as far as size goes, but they're really well known for putting out high quality books. Like most of their books they put out, you don't even have to read them. They're just pretty books, the illustrations, the covers, and they look great on the shelf. They look great giving as a gift. Like anybody gets one as a gift, even if they hate the book, they'll love having the book because Quirk just takes such care in how those books are made and presented, and like they're probably the best publisher I've ever worked with. I've probably worked with 6 at this point. So,
oh wow, yeah. I mean, I can't not complain about this hardcover book at all. I really can't. Like, and the fact of how ridiculously cheap it is too. And then I'm saying that as in the way of, you know, when we hear hardcover book, we're looking at $40-$50, I want to say, depending on how big the book is itself. But your United States of Cryptids, according to the back of it anyway, is running like $19.99. So that's like a beautiful price for a hardcover book.
Yeah, they do that. They have ways to do that. They like make sure like when we're talking about what kind of book we want to make with the publisher, you know, they're always really, really focused on word count. So like, and when I come in, I'm like, okay, we're going to do this book. I want to do like 70 different creatures. Then I have to like balance with like, how long are the essays? How long, you know, how many creatures can I chop out? Who's necessary, who's not necessary? So it's a big kind of algorithm because again, they want to make sure it's an amazing looking book at like a great price point. And they nail it every single time. Like I love those books that they make. I've done 2 with them so far. I'm working on a 3rd one, and every single time they've kind of knocked it out of the park.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into them more. That was my bad. I should have done a little bit more research on them because I'm kind of curious to see what else they have released under their names for sure. Because maybe, who knows, maybe I've ran into them before and not even realized it. So
very possible. Very possible.
So, Jason, you know, so kind of tell people who may not have gotten a chance to have came out last October, and for people it was like I can't remember the exact day, but it was in October of 2022 when you and Joe Citro came into that town. It just brain farted me again. Oh man,
Dorset Library. Yeah,
thank you. And it was actually really fun to be there. So honestly, that's kind of why I went, was because I heard not only was it Joe Citro, but you were going to be there. And I was like, oh, who is this guy? I've never heard of this guy. So I'm glad I did, because honestly, I've purchased your book that day. You autographed it for me, and we talked, and that's how here we are today talking, kind of thing. But no, so I guess for people that did not get a chance to experience that, not only to share stories, but tell us, who is Jason? Like, what got you into this world of the unknown and cryptids and everything else?
Sure. So my entire writing career started with the website I started in 2007 called Odd Things I've Seen. It's Otis is the acronym for that one. And all I would do is I would go out, on the weekends randomly, and go out and drive to something weird, and take photos of it, and then write about it and post it on the website. That weird was broad, right? It could be, cryptid sites. It could be paranormal sites. It could be oddities of like art or history or nature, or anything that was weird to me that had a good story behind it and had a physical presence. That was very important to me too, because I wasn't looking for folklore. I was looking for a physical thing I could take a picture of. So if it was just a random story, I kind of didn't care. But if it was a random story tied to a bridge, or if there was a plaque mentioning it or something like that, then I was all in. So then I started traveling the country looking for weird stuff, and the site grew, and I started writing books about what I was finding. And then for this particular book, The United States of Cryptids, I had just done a book with Quirk called Cursed Objects, where, I wrote about 50 of the most cursed objects in the world. But as part of that, because, I like to travel and see these things physically, part of my angle of any book I do is I go visit stuff. I have to visit. You don't have to. As a nonfiction writer, you can do your research, I guess, and just write a book. But I make sure I have some kind of travel angle to it, because I want to go out there and see stuff. And so we did this book on cursed objects. It was really successful. It's been in like 12 different languages. It sold really well. It's another beautiful book. If you see it, it's a gorgeous book, fully illustrated. And then, that was successful enough that the publisher came to me and said, hey, we got to do another one. Like, what are you thinking for another book about weird stuff? And I'm like, you know what? I have no idea. So we batted up a bunch of ideas around, couldn't really come up with anything. And then she said, well, what about cryptids? And I'm like, that's my editor. And I'm like, I love cryptids. On my own, I go to cryptid sites all the time. I love the idea of like these monsters. I got into cryptids when I encountered John Keel's book, one of John Keel's book back in the early days, my young days. And she was like, okay, well, let's do a book just like Cursed Objects. Write about all the cryptids from each state, make it the United States of Cryptids. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that, but I feel like that comes out every year. I feel like there's an encyclopedia of cryptids almost every single year. That's kind of been done to death. So she let me take it away and think about what could be a cool angle on that. And then, of course, I just like, I travel. So the travel's the angle. So the angle we came up with is not just stories about monsters across the country, but the towns that celebrate them. So towns that have erected, that throw festivals for these monsters, or erect statues or museums or plaques or anything like that. If there's some physical presence, then we want them in the book. And then there was scores of those, but we wanted even more monsters. So we said, well, how do we get more monsters in here? So I said, okay, if they have some kind of physical memorialization, they'll be in the book. Or if I think they should have one, I'll pitch. I'll pitch that they should have one, and they'll be in the book. And by doing that, we came up with about 71 different cryptids. And I'd probably say over 50 of those have sites you can go see. When I mean sites, I mean tourist sites almost. Not just like where they were cited, actual tourist sites. So it's a travelogue, but it's also a book about cryptozoology. And that's kind of how it happened. So that came out, like you said, in October, and I've been to lots of cool places to celebrate cryptids. And now I'm fully immersed in the world of monsters. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. So I was almost thinking the same thing too. Like United States of Cryptids, it feels like it. We could almost beat it with a horse kind of thing.
Yeah. Like every year a map comes out, right? Somebody puts a map on Etsy or something that shows all these monsters on the map. Yeah.
Yep, and maybe the only different thing is like maybe it's a different monster, but yeah, I mean point exactly. But yeah, every year there's always something new or changed, but they try to act like it's new. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I like your idea of exactly like what you said. Like I love the folklore and all this stuff, but if you give me a place or a road or a bridge that I can physically go visit, that's what makes it so much more better.
Mhm.
And like I remember before I kind of started to do this whole haunted Vermont thing. One of the old tales that I don't even remember who told me it or anything, but it was like the white lady on Marble Street in West Rutland.
Mhm.
Supposedly you could see her at nighttime. You could stop, and it's the typical, like the hitchhiker story where you stop, ask her if you need help. You can turn around or something, and she's gone. It's like she's never there to begin with, on the side of the road. But then, when you start looking at more stories or legends or folklore that is around the road too, we also got like Whipple Hollow.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Whipple Hollow
I don't think
around
so.
here. So supposedly Whipple Hollow was a town back in the marble industry days, but because of the marble running out or becoming dry or something to that effect, the people basically got up and left the town. So basically, it became like a ghost town.
Gotcha.
And so supposedly, one of the stories now that ties into that white lady from Marble Street in West Rutland is this is the lady from that town that got killed or something like that. I tried reaching out to like the West Rutland Historical Society to see if they could tell me anything about it. Unfortunately, they um, swear that there was never a town there. But then if you talk to other people, they will tell you, yes, there used to be a town there back in the marble industry days. But then it became deserted. There's now ruins, apparently, of the old town still to this day. But I'd like to know where, because if you travel Whipple Hollow Road, it's kind of like farmland. So there's
Mhm.
really not much more going on. So it makes me
Gotcha.
wonder where exactly the town was, kind of thing. So,
Yeah, I
but
love being
anyway,
in this town.
yeah, and that's always stuck with me. So then I wanted to kind of learn more about Vermont folklore and stuff like that. So I found Joe Citro's work and had my own experiences with the paranormal and stuff like that. But I mean, I'm not here to blabber on. It should be you here, but I just wanted to share that. But just the fact of me being able to go to that Marble Street, where all these other stores are, like uh, Whipple Hollow connects to
Mhm.
that road. So you got that, and then Joe Citro had a uh, story in one of his books where on Marble Street there's a swamp there called West Rutland Boardwalk, which is like part of the swamp. Supposedly there's a legend there how you can hear ghostly voices throughout the swamp.
Mm,
So not only do you have the lady in white on Marble Street, you got like you got two other things connecting that one road,
gotcha.
basically.
Yeah, that's great because again, especially these days where all of us can read every single story on the internet forever, like getting out and seeing something physical is now even more unique experience.
Exactly. And I want to say when you were at the event, you were kind of saying that too, that when right in the United States of Cryptid, you were kind of traveling to each state or something like that, right?
Yeah, most of them. I didn't get to every single one just because of time and budget reasons, but like I got to a lot. So I've and in addition to that, because I've always been kind of interested in cryptids, I've been to a lot of stuff beforehand, so I didn't even need to revisit it. So I've seen the cryptid sites in again, it's 71 monsters. It's obviously more than 50 states, but I've been to like 49 out of the 50 states of America, just generally. But for the cryptids, I probably went to, I don't know, 30 of the states, 20 to 30 of the states. So definitely a lot, definitely enough to like maybe feel like I was validated in saying I traveled for this book.
Fair enough. Well, either way, man, it's still cool. Like, I mean, I'm still kind of jelly that I think I've seen some posts of yours from like the Mothman statue and
Yes.
stuff like that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, those are on my bucket list. Maybe one day I'll go visit them, but we'll see.
And every
Uh,
September, I tell myself I'm gonna go down to the Mothman Festival, and I just have never gone. Because it's so far away from where we are in New England. But like, and the
right.
downside of that too is when I was writing the book, it was full on COVID. So like all the festivals were canceled, so I couldn't even like go to festivals as an excuse for the book. So like, I was visiting the Mothman statue, like it's a deserted town, and then like while I was during the festival, it's like 10,000 people there. So yeah, the Mothman site's one of my favorite sites in all of cryptozoology.
Oh, right. So, one thing that I'm pretty sure you might have mentioned, but again, I'll just touch on it a little bit. So every state, it looks like you have about 2 cryptids, and I bet that was hard.
On average, so some only have one, some have like 4, because there's some states that are cryptid rich and some that are impoverished. Like I'm in New Hampshire, that's a cryptid impoverished state. So we've got a Bigfoot. Every state has a Bigfoot, obviously. We have some kind of lake monster. Every state has a lake monster. And then for that town, for New Hampshire, I basically chose what's called the Derry Ferry, which was a one-time occurrence that happened in Derry, New Hampshire, and the creature was only seen for one night. I usually call those like one-night stand cryptids. So it wasn't like some cryptids, like the Mothman was a year of sightings, right?
Oh yeah,
Or like Champ in Vermont is just continual sightings forever. It's not even like a time frame. But sometimes I had to like just pick a one time only or one show only cryptid, and New Hampshire was one of those states. Whereas something like Wisconsin or Ohio or West Virginia, they have so many cryptids, and not only do they have so many cryptids, they have so many celebrations of those cryptids. They do really well at celebrating them. So I'm kind of jealous of those states for having that.
well, I mean, I've been looking into the Alaska stuff, like the Alaska Triangle stuff. That is some crazy stuff. So
Yeah. For my Alaska chapter, I got to do an actual dinosaur, which is like huge. It could fit in the Alaska world. And Alaska's great because there's not a ton of stories out of Alaska, but it's only because there's hardly anybody there, right? And it's got the most wilderness. It's got the most, like, for finding unknown monsters, it has the most acreage for that, right? It's the size of the United States, basically. So Alaska's a very, very, and it's also the state I have not been to yet. Out of the 49 out of 50, that's the one state I haven't seen yet. So it's a very special target for me one day.
well, hopefully you don't become one out of the 16,000 people that go missing a year.
There's definitely a chance because I'm definitely terrible at being a wilderness guy.
Well, it's funny to me because, like, as you were sort of saying, like, there's not that many people in Alaska, but it's also because they're kind of used to the cryptids there. Like, they're so used to it that it's just like, oh yeah, I saw Bigfoot last night. Big whoops, Like, it's not like us. It's not like us here in the States where we're like, oh my god, Bigfoot! Can you believe that? Oh my god, where? We gotta go check this out. Like Alaska has more of like that humor. Like, yeah, we know.
Yep.
But I don't know. I just find it fascinating just because of some of the areas around Alaska. Like I was listening to the podcast of Alaska Triangle, and I just got done with the episode about what they call Bigfoot Island, which is on Prince Wales Island, I want to say.
Bigfoot Island. I don't think I've even come across that. Bigfoot Island. That's good.
Yeah, so supposedly these Bigfoot on this island are like so aggressive that they're trying to push back against humanity, like because of them being so much territorial.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I'll look that up after this. I just like the phrase Bigfoot Island, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. I was like, oh, that's clever. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. So Jason, kind of going back here. So what really kind of made you start, like, even if you were young, like, what was maybe one of the first things that really grabbed your attention that said, oh wow, like, this is cool, like, I want to check out more of this? So what is there a favorite folklore story or something?
Yeah, so one of the first books I remember being like nonfiction weirdness, right? So I grew up liking monsters like most kids, right? Godzillas and Draculas and stuff. But then one day I picked up a book by John Keel, he's like the man who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, right? He made the Mothman famous, right, with his book. But the book I picked up was just a small little paperback, like encyclopedia of cryptids, basically. And the cover had this hand-drawn image of illustration of, it was the Mothman, it was the Loch Ness Monster, it was a Bigfoot, and I grabbed it from the library, just drew my eyes, grabbed it, and then reading about them, and be like, oh, this is a class of monsters. It's way different than Godzilla and Dracula. This is a class of monsters that some people say actually exists, and there are actual stories of witnesses seeing these. Especially the Mothman. That thing was so alien to me, like, to see that. Whereas Bigfoot, Bigfoot is so much in our culture that's it's like Mickey Mouse. Like, everybody knows about Bigfoot. So, like, that's the one that got me. Like, so from that point on, I was always kind of like into it. And then, as I got older, I think the Weird New Jersey guys, their book series that they have out, weird US books, those things were highly influential. Right? They made everybody want to grab their books and go find weird stuff. And a couple of shows, always documentaries of, like, Mysterious World and, like, all those kinds of, like, Arthur C. Clarke's stuff. And so that whole, like, culture of, like, there's weird mysteries out there always appealed to me. And of course the internet kind of killed that a little bit, because, no longer was it just you to, like, really dig to find the book or the show to watch. Like, the internet gave it to you all at your fingertips. But the beauty of the internet, making all that stuff kind of common, mainstream, is that, like, now you could figure out where to go yourself again, and you could get so hyper local, right? So Mysterious World never wrote about my town, right? Because they were too busy writing about Stonehenge, and they're too busy doing, Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. So, like, knowing that now you can find stuff locally, that's what really got me. And then once I started researching that, the number of legends and stories and things you can go see locally is astounding. Like, I've lived in New Hampshire for 15 years, and I still come across new things every month that I have never heard of. And I've driven all over New Hampshire. I've driven all over New England, but all over New Hampshire specifically. So that's just always fascinating to me, that this the localness of weirdness is, like, that it's so rich, and it's not all the big names that we all know about already. So that's kind of my progression on the weird. And again, when I started Otis, it was mostly out of boredom, because at that point, I think I was out of college, and I had my own apartment. I actually lived in an apartment the next town over from where the Blair Witch was filmed.
Oh, wow.
In Maryland. Yeah, in fact, one of the interviews from the beginning of Blair Witch happened at this shop right across from my apartment. And so, like, I was just bored. I was like, and I didn't want to do typical things. Like, I didn't like go into, whatever. I go to the bars on Friday and go to, like, sports events and stuff. I wanted something that was different, and, like, the paranormal offers that in droves. And of course, back then, that was also the beginning of, like, the ghost hunting phenomenon that became huge, and, like, like I said, the weird US books making oddity hunting huge. So, like, it was a good time, like, when the world was like, filled with wonder, and yet you hadn't explored it yet.
Very nice. Yeah, I think one of my favorite from, like, the weird, like, the weird in whatever state, basically, for the one that they did with Weird in Vermont, was the whale tail that we have here.
Yes, those are awesome. I've been there. Yeah, that was one of the first things I wrote about once I moved up here, and I was still doing Otis. That's exactly the kind of stuff I was looking for. Giant whale tail sticking out of the ground that you can just park and go. You see from the highway, and most people only see them from the highway. They just drive by them, but you can just park and go walk right up between them anytime you wanted to. Like, those things are awesome. I love them.
Yeah, and that the book, though, that made me go, oh wow, that's cool that Vermont had these weird things around here, because otherwise, you almost feel like you could miss that. Mm-hmm. And it's nice that somebody acknowledges the weird, I guess, per se.
Yeah, and we're kind of lucky up here as well, because New England is obviously the oldest part of the country itself, obviously. And what that means is lots of people and lots of time, and that usually means weird stuff, right? So we have graveyards that go back to, like, the 1600s. No other state has, no other section of the United States has that. We have, like, all of the beginnings of American history going on there. We've had it's a major, because of Boston, it's a major population hub. So to me, all the weird stuff is people plus time plus death, and that's when you get that's where you get all the paranormal stuff. That's where you get all, like, the interesting memorials and markers, all the history. Is that, and New England just has that in spades.
Yeah, so that's funny. Like, speaking of, like, cemeteries and stuff, so I got one for you. A friend of mine told me about this like years ago when I first started haunting Vermont. They're like, "Oh yeah, you should go past Mountaintop Inn in Chittenden, Vermont, and if you follow that road around there and you come to this one area, there's graves there, and they
Mhm.
think that it used to be part of the town or whatever that was there. So anyway, so I'm like, town, random graveyard, okay, I'm down for this. So I one day went up and looked for these graves because supposedly it said that they're old ruins of what used to be like the civilization there are still there, but nobody can remember where exactly they were, which is
Mhm.
sad. But that's what happens with nature. Nature takes back what it should be claiming anyway. So it reclaimed back what it once was nature, is what I'm trying to say. So
Mhm.
anyway, I cannot find anything at first. And then somehow we got to this one part of the trail, and I just happened to glance over, and right between the tall grass and these weird trees, I see this big uh, gravestone. And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh my God, these are it." So, of course, I walked over, and there's literally four gravestones, I want to say, that are just there. It's so weird because it's like, why are they not in a proper cemetery, as we would call it? Like, they're here in this middle of nowhere, but
Mhm.
yet it's supposedly said it used to be an old town there called New Boston, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, I just want to give the listeners an idea of where I'm talking about, just in case. But yeah, they it's fascinating with these graves just randomly right here. Um, and then another little quick example is: are you familiar with Bennington at all? Like where the
Yeah.
Glastonbury Mountains is
Yep.
and stuff like
Mhm.
that?
That's where like
So
Robert
did
Frost is buried, and they have that like the creepy old house that's in the middle of town. I can't remember. I always forget the name of it, but yeah, I've been to Bennington a few times.
so there's a pull off um right before uh reaching the parking lot where you can park for Glastonbury Mountains.
Mhm.
And if you go into the pull off and start walking up that trail to, I want to say, the right, you have to go over a little stream. I do remember that because I got my shoes wet, unfortunately. But there's like, once again, this interesting cemetery that's within the woods of that area. And because of me being my haunted Vermont and stuff like that, I had me and two other people with me. One of the guys was a friend of my friend who wanted to show me this particular spot anyway because I've never been there before, and they randomly stumbled across this like uh, grave area, I guess I'm just going to say, for lack of the term here. But what I found really weird about this cemetery, per se, there's a campfire right next to it. There's a campfire. So it's like, okay, so I guess people can come here, have a cookout with the dead or something like that. Like it's weird. Like there's beer bottle too when we went up there, but there's a campfire. What are we right by this grave uh, this graves of like old I'm just gonna say old civilization of wherever these people used to live. But it was interesting because I don't know how much of a believer you are, Jason, but like because of me, I'm always curious to see if I can capture anything like EVPs,
Mhm.
electronic voice phenomenon, stuff like that. I tried EMF and stuff like that there. So what really got me was we tried to record to see if we could capture anything, and one of the most weirdest EVPs we got from this cemetery is a female voice, and I just want to make a note for my listener too, and telling it to you. is that there's no female with us. There's no females. It's just me and 2 other males. A female voice was captured, basically saying like, "Don't, basically don't tell anybody." Like I'm wondering if that was the response of saying like, "Are you?" Because I think I want to say something to the effect of like, "Are you here?" Like, stuff like something to the along the effect of that, and it's almost like the female were trying to say, "Don't tell anybody," as in like, "Don't tell anybody like that they're here," like like they're roaming around in the cemetery or something. So I never could quite understand what that response was for. So I always took it as they just didn't want to be known that there's there.
Yeah, I love cemeteries. Like I think I say this. I think cemeteries is one of the reasons I moved to New England from the DC area, because not only are they so old and have history, they're everywhere. Like you said, you're finding them randomly in the woods. I passed like I think 3 on the way to my grocery store. They're just stuck everywhere, and they're all so old. And there's so many stories in them, and they have such cool like epitaphs and imagery and stuff. So I love the cemeteries of New England. There's no place, nothing like them in the United States for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And one of my favorites, and I've only been there once, is have you ever been to Greenmount Cemetery, where the infamous Black Agnes is?
Yes, I have quite a few times. Mm-hmm.
I mean that cemetery alone is gorgeous. Like as I may say, like some of the structures of the stones for the gravestones for some of the people that rest there are like just like wow, like this is crazy. Yeah, some of the architecture.
I always take people there in the fall because it's surrounded by mountains and like they have a massive variety of trees, and it's like every single fall color just around that cemetery. And it's like you said, it has like the Black Agnes, which is a really kind of spooky statue. It's got like nice mausoleums. It's got trees all throughout. It's on the side of a hill, so it's got like this kind of cool like canter to it. It's got this set of steps like built into it. That's part of a tomb. It's like built into it. That's one of my favorites. I would probably put that. I have been so many now. I'd probably put that in my top 10 cemeteries in New England. That cemetery.
Now I gotta ask: have you sat on her lap?
Yes, I did. I did because there's a corresponding legend in Maryland where I'm from called the Black Aggie. It has almost the exact same story of like sitting in their lap and glowing red eyes and all those kinds of things. Except in the case of the Black Aggie in Maryland and Baltimore, it's not there anymore. Only her podium is there, and they moved it to like literally to a building beside the White House, downtown DC. It's now like just a statue instead of a grave marker. They turned it into just like a statue because so many people were visiting it and trying to get spooked out by it that the cemetery was like, we have to get rid of this thing. It's drawing too much attention. So they sent it to the Smithsonian, who just kept it in the basement somewhere because it's a copy of another legit sculpture, grave sculpture elsewhere in DC. And finally somebody was like, we need a decoration for our courtyard. So they go in the basement and pull out this spooky looking figure in like a cowl and stuff, and they just put it right up in this little courtyard outside, like literally 2 blocks from the White House.
Okay. I knew there was one there, and then there's supposedly one more in Illinois somewhere.
So. I think so, right? I think I know what you're talking about. So like again, it's so funny that so many states have such similar legends. It's just like even down to the name, like you said, Aggie is the name of the one in Vermont. It's also, or Agnes is the name of the one in Vermont. It's the exact same name of the one in Maryland, and so that similarity is always kind of like fascinating to me.
Well, at least you didn't get dragged to hell or wherever the story goes, man.
Not yet. I've tried my hardest. Like you're asking, like, you don't know how deep my belief goes. I have never, and I'm saying this sadly, not like proudly. I've never had a ghostly experience, and I've stayed overnight in abandoned prisons, abandoned asylums, graveyards. I've murder scenes. I'm constantly in places where you're supposed to find those experiences. And I just haven't had one yet, which just means, right? It means 2 things. Either, it could mean 3 things. It could mean it's not true, but the other 2 things are I'm one experience away from believing. I just need one, or maybe I'm just 6th sense blind. Some people just don't have that sense to see something else, and I might be one of those people. So, which is fine. I'll listen to everybody else's stories and write about those stories and have fun with those people. So. One day I'll have a story. I have to. I can't go my whole life writing about the paranormal and not having a story. I hate it.
Yeah, I can't even recall how many I sort of have. I don't have as many as probably some other people, but I have enough that just make me go, yeah, there's something else going on in this world than what we get told, you know.
Sure, sure.
So like uh okay, so I got another cool one to go back with the cemetery one real quick. Because I just felt this is really compelling to me of the paranormal world to make me more of a believer is so I used to be in my own paranormal group, and we kind of went around cemeteries and stuff like that. There was a specific cemetery we went to a few times in Chittenden called Horton Cemetery. It's where like the Eddy brothers are buried and stuff like that.
Mhm. Well,
So
are those the psychics? Is that who that is?
yep,
Okay,
yeah, the
gotcha.
second brother. Yep. And so I had my spirit box there, and just in case for somebody that's listening, a spirit box is basically like an EVP, but instead of having to go back to listen to it, the spirit box is you can basically hear the response in real time. So you can almost have like a conversation going on in real time, kind of thing. Um, so anyway, I just barely got the spirit box. I wanted to check it out, so why not go to a cemetery? So that's the one we went to with Horton, the one where the Yeti brothers are buried and stuff like that. Uh, we ended up getting our first name out of the spirit box, and it was a guy, male voice that came through the static of sweeping through the channels of the radio frequency and the white noise, basically to help people that may not know. But anyway, we got a name, and it was a male voice. His name was Ralph, and you could hear it clear as day, Ralph. And so I never forgot that. Now, what was interesting about this is that I never really looked around the cemetery that much. I only went with my couple of buddies to try to find the Eddy brothers, and we did, and we didn't really look any like really pay attention to anybody else that was buried there. But so Ralph, I remembered the name Ralph. So a week later, we went back. I went. Let me rephrase that. I went back with a few other people, and with this new group with me, I was explaining how we were here last weekend. We got the name Ralph for the spirit box. I'm curious, is there a grave named Ralph here? So we're all looking, and we came across a stone or a couple stones that actually had the name Ralph on it.
Hmm.
So put two and two together, I say that's pretty compelling evidence that there is a Ralph still lingering around that cemetery.
Yeah, I like it. Sounds good to me.
All right, Jason. Well, I mean, I don't want to keep you too much more, but before we were recording, we were just talking a little bit. So, what type of projects are you having right now going on that you could possibly share to people that may be interested to learn more about your works coming out and stuff that you have published in the past besides the United States of Cryptids and stuff? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, so you can see most of my stuff at oddthingsiveseen.com. That's it's a very old site. It looks like an old site. It's like probably the last site built on Blogger in the planet. But that shows you all my books. I published about 10 books. I'd say more than half of those are nonfiction, where I visit stuff like me going to weird stuff, cursed objects, cryptids, Edgar Allan Poe sites, a book about me living in Salem, a book called the New England Grimpendium, where I just went all over New England finding death-related sites. There's like I think I drove 7,000 miles to New England, and there's some like over 100 sites in the book, and that's like everything from paranormal sites to like horror movie sites to like monster sites. That was probably the first I ever wrote about cryptids was in that book, actually. And then I write novels as well. I have a horror novel out. I have a few children's horror novels. But what I'm working on right now, this second, that doesn't come out till 2024, but I'm already working on right now, is a book about cults. So this is also through Quirk. So I'll have cursed objects, cryptids, and cults, 3 C's for some reason. And they're all the same kind, like really nice books. I get to like dig deep into this world of cults, which can be fun, but then it's not also fun because those things get pretty gnarly. Unlike cryptids and like cursed objects, they get really gnarly in the cult world. So I get to write about that kinds of stuff. So that's what I'm at right now. which is good. It's a good, fun book. I would say not as fun as Cryptids, but definitely an interesting book.
Awesome. Well, Jason, if you had to tell somebody like what a cryptid is, what would you say to them?
Yep, and I have to do that pretty often. So at first I say, well, usually if I wanted just a shortcut, I'm just like, like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. That's all, and that's as far as I go. But if I'm trying to define it for them, I'll say creatures that science hasn't agreed exist yet. So, and then I say like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monsters, because everybody knows those two. Those two are like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. People know those two. If I'm like, like the Snarlygaster or the Wampahoofus, nobody knows what those are, so it's a little bit harder to do. But yeah, that's kind of how I explain it. And they're still, for people that aren't already in the know on cryptids, there's still kind of a blank look to their eyes, like what, I don't even understand why. They get Bigfoot, they get like creatures in water, but they don't kind of understand that there's a whole ology around it or a whole culture around it. They don't get that part at all. So it's a lot of fun to kind of educate them on that.
Perfect. Now, the last thing I just want to say is, so I know we were kind of jumping all over the place with the United States of Cryptids, so I don't want somebody to message me and be like, why didn't you ask him about blah, 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 So, real quick, so one of the cryptids besides Champ that you mentioned in the book for Vermont is, I'm probably going to butcher this again, but we'll see. Wampahoofus?
You nailed it. It's Wampahoofus, yeah.
And according to this, it's around the Underhill, Vermont area. And I kind of read this and understood your little section here about this Wampahoofus, is that the name comes from the Wampahoofus Trail.
No, the trail is named after the creature. So there's cryptids these days, aren't just, what I call plausible biological creatures, right? Which is Bigfoot, right? A giant ape is very plausible for us to imagine because, we're all giant furry beings, right? So put a little more fur on us, another 6 inches, whatever. We're Bigfoot, or even a lake monster, right? That's very believable to us that there's stuff in the water that we haven't seen yet. But because because in the cryptozoology world, you just want as many monsters as possible. It's like Pokemon; you want to collect them all. Sometimes we include in that aliens, or we include folklore, or we include lumberjack tales. And this is a lumberjack tale, which is basically back in the days of New England when the lumberjacks were clearing the land. They would just be in the dark, right? This is like 19th century or 18th century, in the dark around a campfire. The noises of these natural woods around them, and they would come up with like monsters that they thought fit the noise or the thing they saw, and Wampahoofus fits in that category. It's a goat-like creature, and this is obviously there's like very different interpretations of it, but basically it's a goat-like creature with legs that are shorter on one side than the other. And the reason why that is because they're mountain creatures. So the short legs on top and long legs on the bottom help them traverse mountains. It also kind of becomes a problem because if they can only traverse it one way. So, like if they reverse, they fall off the mountain and die. If they run into another Wampahoofus, they have to fight to the death or mate. So, and the idea is that over time, they just kind of like the Wampahoofus, just kind of like that's a very delicate biological structure to be like snaggle leg like that. They just kind of like evolved themselves out of that, but it actually has a scientific precedent because back in the early days of naturology. Scientists or naturalists, there weren't scientists back then really, but naturalists thought that the badger had uneven legs, and that was why it could be so fast around hills and stuff. And the reason why I put the Wampahoofus in the book is because there is a trail named after him in Mount Mansfield. So I went down there. I found a friend that lives near Mount Mansfield who's a local Vermontier, and he took me to Mount Mansfield to take the trail, to find the trail, and it was legit one of the scariest experiences I've ever had. The Mount Mansfield is very rocky, very icy, very sheer. And I'm like, we were on like a regular path that's open to anybody. And I was like, man, I feel like we need to be professional climbers to take these paths. Because you have to go like sheerly down one side, up an ice cliff on the other side almost. But then meanwhile, like, old people with dogs are like just trucking by us and stuff like they do it every day. So it's a very interesting place. Mount Mansfield is pretty awesome. And the fact that it has a trail named after a cryptid is, makes it unique.
Agreed. And, just to quote off your last line for that part of that cryptid is, I guess they didn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, with the pun. Yeah, unfortunately, I did that.
That was a good way to end it, though. I have to agree. So, oh Jesus. So I guess my last thing about the book is, so I know you kind of like you were saying, depending on the state, you were either doing 1 to 4, depending on the circumstances here. But so I guess I'm assuming there was like a lot of cryptids that you wish you could have added, but you just couldn't because of the. It sounds like you could only have a certain amount anyway.
Yeah, and sometimes the cryptid looked cool. Again, the artist's conception looked cool, but like there was no story to it. Like the story is, it was seen one time, and it's literally the whole story, or it was so, or it didn't make sense, or it was repetitive. Right? Like I said, literally every single town or every single state has a Bigfoot sighting. Also, these days, almost every single state has a Bigfoot museum or statue or something. Like Bigfoot is celebrated like crazy. So again, I was trying to find places that actually celebrated different monsters. But yeah, if I think my original list was probably closer to 100. And again, I also wanted to be balanced, right? So I couldn't just do 10 cryptids in Ohio when Delaware has like 2 in total, and they're boring stories, right? So that's kind of, there's a big almost algorithm calculus we had to do to figure out, okay, who deserves here, who doesn't, who's not. And some of them are automatics, right? Like Champ is an automatic inclusion, right? Not only is it one of the most famous cryptids, and not only is it, believable, and not only is it shared by two states and the one of the largest body of waters in the country, they celebrate that thing really well. There's like a mark memorial for it. They name the team, the amateur baseball team after it. They're inside the science center is a giant recreation of it and a whole like display about it. And then you go over to the New York side and they have a parade dedicated to it, and they have like a lot of businesses named after it. So that guy Champ was just a no-brainer. He was almost like iconic of exactly the type of creature I wanted to include in the book, even though he is, a water dinosaur, which is, a lot of states have water dinosaurs, but nobody has like the culture around it and the celebration around it and the longevity and stories around it that Champ does.
Perfect, man. Well, hopefully, maybe we could see a United States of Cryptid Part 2 or something. See something.
Yeah, I would do it in a heartbeat. In fact, hopefully, a lot of towns will read this book and start erecting memorials to their cryptids. It'll be even more to find.
Oh, geez. That sounds pretty amazing already. Well, all right, Jason. Well, I don't want to keep more of your time, but it was a pleasure to talk with you. And if you ever need to talk cryptids or paranormal or cursed object or something, and you'd like to help get the word out there too, or just want to talk in general about something, feel free to reach out.
Sure, man. I definitely appreciate the invitation. This was fun.
Yeah, likewise, man. I always like to pick people's brains and, hear how they got started and if they have any experiences. And just like you, I don't want to say sad man, but, you kind of said it yourself. Like, it's sad that you write about it, but you don't have any stories to really be like, ah!
Exactly. One day, man, I'll get some stories.
One day, man. Yeah. So, real quick, Jason, just one last time, so people can find all your links and stuff on your oldest or odd things I've seen.
Yep.
So oldest.com or something like that. Yeah.
OddthingsI'veSeen.com. I think Otis.com is an elevator. They couldn't get that from them. But
right.
It's an elevator company. But yeah, you can go to your local bookstores. They have most of the books. They can order the books. They're around. They're hard. If you're looking for them, you can find them for sure.
Perfect, man. Well, once again, Jason, thank you for your time. And like I said, feel free to reach out anytime. And for everybody else listening, just make sure that you have a nightlight on or some type of lamp when you're out in the woods, because you just never know. It's a Bigfoot or some sort of weird dog man or something could just sneak up behind you, grab you, and then you're just gone forever. The end.